Bene, ci troviamo qui in occasione dell'11ª edizione di Book City e ho il piacere e l'onore di intervistare Lidia Yuknavitch con questo meraviglioso libro. Sono già usciti altri 2 libri di Lidia nel nostro paese, questo è uno dei suoi primissimi e finalmente vede la luce anche da noi perché era assolutamente necessario averlo. Io sono molto emozionato e spero di reggere questa intervista. Allora, thank you Lidia for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
I'm very, very pleased to be here because, like I told you before, I love this book very much. I think it's an amazing book and it goes beyond what other books do usually. My first question is about the nature of the book. The Chronology of Water is called a memoir, but to me it's much more than a memoir because it, in a way, of course it's a memoir, but it's also very narrative. And it's also a kind of self-help book. And so my question is, what is this book to you? How do you define this book?
Hello, Italy. I understand what you mean. When I moved forward to write the book, I was trying to write a memoir and it didn't work. I failed. But what happened differently is that when I began to enter storytelling as a form, the motion of stories that we share, and I picked different times and places in my life and opened the story up and tried to feel what it would be like to give it to a person sitting next to me, that form works for me. And that's how the story broke down into pieces of small stories that could just be passed person to person. And so sometimes the stories are about something that happened, and sometimes they're about a question like, how do we survive this together? Or how do I stay alive? And each turn, each piece makes a turn to the next story. So I think it's just the act of storytelling itself that I wanted to enter, almost like I was swimming in water. And so it is kind of a memoir. It's a little bit of an anti-memoir because I broke so many rules. And if it helps even one person, it's enough.
I guess it helped a lot, much more than one person. We can definitely say it's a very personal book.
Yes.
Okay. And it's a book about your journey in life. From your childhood to your younger self, to your adult one. You talk about how difficult it was when you were a child, the difficult relation you have with your father. You talk about relationship when you were still young with men, then with women, and the book it deals with all of that. Okay, what is in all this structure? What is the role of water? Why did you call it the chronology of water?
Well, water doesn't really have chronology, or if it does, it's not linear time. It's circles and waves and motion and life and death, always in motion. And that felt more accurate to me, more precise about my life experience. Because if I had started with childhood and written in a straight line to adult, that didn't seem accurate or precise. My memory moves in circles and jumps around. And for me to tell the story, I had to kind of move like water, make a narrative motion that moved like water. So that's why water was such an important metaphor for me. And also I was a competitive swimmer for about 20 years. You can't tell anymore, but I used to be very athletic and svelte. But water gave me freedom from my home life, escape, strength, meditation, calm, I learned to be strong, because competitors. And I learned to be part of a group of people while still feeling very alone, very isolated. And so for me, water was everything. And it has been my entire life. So I just tried to make a form on the page that matched those feelings. Does that make sense?
It makes perfectly sense.
Good.
There is a quote in the book that I like very much. It's written in fragments because that's how I conceived my life.
Yes. So the pieces of my life come and go. I don't know anyone's life who your memory is perfectly linear. That just isn't how it feels to me. And so I was trying to get the reader to feel those little pieces of the past come and go, maybe.
No, you did. You absolutely did. What impressed me most about your book, reading it, it's how brutally honest you are with yourself and with the reader, of course. And you show yourself in the most vulnerable way, but also sometimes you show yourself at your worst.
Yes.
You didn't have any compassion in a way. And I remember, like, for instance, the car accident that you talk about,
yes,
where you
terrible.
were completely drunk, driving.
Yep.
And when I read this, I thought, you must be very brave to write something like that. And I wonder, was it liberating for you, or was more a kind of responsibility that you took upon yourself?
Yes, I understand. I understand what you mean. But when I'm telling the stories about my dark moments or mistakes, I don't feel brave. I feel something more like this responsibility to tell the truth, not for myself, like it will gain me something, but for those around me who may be afraid or feel shame or like they're bad people. Because if I step out and tell my piece of it, like I did this, it was terrible, it means we can help each other carry shame.
Yeah.
And we can help each other carry pain. And we can help each other, remember that we're human and no one lives life perfectly. And so there's nothing special about my mistakes, but by opening the story up, perhaps one or two other people will feel less heavy, burdened with their shame. And I suppose religion offers the release of shame, or some people are runners, or they climb mountains, or they paint. This is my version of helping us figure out how to carry our mistakes and shame and keep living, keep on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely relate to this, but I wonder, this is when it's easier when you think about a reader with a stranger. But when you think that somebody close to you read this book, like someone from your family or your friend, or how do you feel about that?
Well, when I was making the first versions, I showed some of the material to people who appeared in the story and my family. And not because I would have stopped if they didn't like it, but just to check. And my sister, who was the most important reader, was grateful that somebody was telling the story, even if it wasn't exactly how she would tell it. Some lovers were unhappy, but they had to admit they understood this piece of my story. And my father, was dead. And so that helped.
Yeah.
Because that rope or tether was gone. So, you know, it's always going to upset somebody when you tell a
Yes.
story that involves them or is negative or is difficult in some ways. But that doesn't mean we should stop telling stories. It means we
Absolutely.
should tell more of them to get all of the angles of vision out and all of the pieces.
Absolutely. This book came out originally 22 years ago in the US.
Yeah. Yes. Is that right?
Yeah, it's in year 2000.
Time.
Yes.
Time.
And in Italy came out just this year. And how do you feel about talking about this book after so many years? I mean, are you a different person now? How do you relate to this book? Also, because I guess it helps so many people, and there is a cult following. They say no about this book. And this doesn't happen often with books. So
True.
so how do you feel about this? All this, the time that passed, and also the cult following that this book created.
I understand. So since I don't believe in linear time, even when I was writing it in the past, I feel as if I was undergoing adaptations in life in circles and jolts and dips and peaks. And I still feel that way. So when I look at my own past, it's as if we've always been in conversation, the past and the present and the future. And we're just versions of those things as we're becoming. So I don't feel, you know, like I'm a radically different person.
Yeah.
I feel older, feel fatter, feel, you know, more tired. But I feel like I'm carrying the sediments of my past. And when I was younger, I was carrying the sediments of who I would become. And they're just in motion. But I will say this, you could not pay me all the money in the world to go back in time. I much prefer, even though we live in difficult times, you could not pay me to go back.
Okay. Talking about several sex experience in the book, you wrote something that I really liked very much. You said, I still didn't know how many times a person can be born. And I think it is a very interesting way of talking about desire and sex. Is discovering a new desire a way to be born again?
Yes. Don't you think?
I absolutely think so.
I do.
But it's not always, I mean, it's
No.
not often said in these words, okay? No, it's a really interesting way of putting it. To be born again because you discover a new desire.
I think so. It's sort of like, you know, in astrophysics, it's like an event horizon. It's this place you come to where you're inside out, and the possibility of complete change and transformation and going somewhere you've never been before because of the motion of desire, if you let it, can you know, transform you. Or we can just have a lot of sex and move on the way we always do. But for me, it's a little bit like an ecstatic state.
Yeah.
There's, you know, so much possibility of energy and a kind of almost cosmic possibility between two people. Every time, no.
No.
But when you are most deeply in desire, I think you leave your former self and become something else. It's constantly evolving and adapting. It's very exciting to me. I think we know this much about sexuality, but we live in very exciting times because the fluidity of sexuality has become more normalized. And so I could talk about desire a long time. I think it's a fascinating state of being.
I love the way you put it. Tell me about Ken Kesey, because the chronology of water, it's also a book about writing, about the importance of writing and about being saved by writings in a way. And I guess Ken Casey is one of your main mentor in this.
He came at a very important time in my life. I was in my 20s still, and kind of leaving the messiness of, and rebel of youth. And he gave me a direction and a focus, which was the page. Because for the first time in my life, someone told me I was beautiful on the page. And I didn't know what that meant, but it was magical to me. It made me feel like I'm going to start crying. Look away. It made me feel like I had a worth, that I was worth something, not just because I was a young woman who could have sex with people. I had a possibility, a worth, and that storytelling was that worth. And so I had already read his books. I loved his work. He was famous in Oregon, but as a person, he was extremely flawed and human, and made a lot of mistakes. And I had a tiny feeling of, this is what it might be like to have had a father who cared what you were good at, and who looked back at you and said, that's beautiful what you made.
I think this book is important to readers, but also it's a very important book to writers. Chuck Palahniuk said he read it dozens of times and always come back for new inspiration, and I perfectly get what he means. So my last question for you is, what kind of suggestion can you give to writers that are, how can I say, struggling and thinking about doing something like this? I mean, talking about their life in the most deep and profound and honest way.
Two things. The first thing is, and this is for all of us right now in these times, never surrender. No matter what's happening, there is a door or a window somewhere. So never surrender. And then more to your question, if you think about it, you're the only person on the planet who can share or give the story of what it was like to be you. And if we don't share our stories, then the worst people get to own the story of who we were and what it was like to be human. And so maybe this is a call to action. That is why you should keep going. Because when sometimes the worst people do come and they take the story, which means we have the responsibility to keep sharing our version, not just one of us to be famous, but many of us, so that the story is loud and plural, many voices, and so that they can't kill us as easily. So that's the reason. It's a call to action.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you very much for having written this book.
My pleasure completely. I adore you.